Hello again, I am Blunty. Do you want to talk more about Star Trek? Because I sure do. I am genuinely excited and even more enthusiastic than I was last week. The videos were remarkably well received. Thank you for that, by the way, guys. Do appreciate that. So I thought, frack it, let's keep going. And for as long as I remain genuinely and joyfully excited and enthusiastic about Strange New Worlds, might as well do this week to week as episodes come out. Right, but before we get rolling properly, as you should expect, it'll be best to come to this video for a discussion of it after you've seen the episode yourself, though I will keep it relatively spoiler light. I won't go beat for beat over the plot or anything like that, but if you're here and try and find out if the show is Trek enough for you before dedicating yourself to watch it, you'll be fine here on this video, at least until we dig into the plot a bit more deeply, and I will give you a warning before that comes, so at your own risk, continue. So episode 1 didn't have a lot of room for the actual plot, as it were, or central conflicts, as it did a lot of early heavy lifting, establishing tone and characters and interpersonal dynamics and setting the stage for us as a whole. Episode 2 flowed much more like a normal, traditional Star Trek episode, beat for beat, in fact, with the exception of the unusual previously on Star Trek Strange New Worlds opening montage, which we only ever really get in Star Trek when it's a two-parter episode of Trek. You know, traditionally speaking. Not sure why they felt the need to do that this time. In this day and age of on-demand streaming, it's not like anyone can accidentally miss the last episode screening on, you know, free-to-air TV and time zones and schedules and things like that, and therefore needs a little catch-up reminder, especially as this is not even, in fact, part of a two-parter or even a narrative sequel to the last episode. It was an odd choice. Threw me off at first. Whatever. In any case, as Trek tradition establishes, first we get the current mission established, and as tradition dictates, this exposition is done not with a clumsy, well, as you know, we've come to this place to blah-de-blah-de-blah exposition between two other characters, but instead with the tidy, concise, and completely natural sounding exposition of a crew member's personal or mission log done in voiceover. Very, very Trek. Usually it's the captain or first officer. This time around, it's Cadet Uhura, around whom much of this episode will revolve. Which is really nice because for as important as OG Uhura was in the original series, as a black woman on screen in a mixed cast, in regards to Gene Roddenberry's philosophy and intent of what some of today's gobshites would continue and hilariously out-of-touchingly scream forced diversity and woke casting, you twats. Uhura never did get a lot of screen time as a character, certainly not nearly as much as many of her peers and fellow shipmates. So it's a cool opportunity to flesh out her character more here, and of course, as a cadet on her first posting on a ship, she provides the narrative trope of being the audience surrogate, the new and inexperienced set of eyes through which a more natural exposition and explanation can happen about the things that are going on. In this episode, through her, we get to see just how exciting and terrifying a career in Starfleet can be, and explore what it means to be in Starfleet at all, what it means to even want to choose a path in Starfleet, and what it really means to earn a place on the flagship of the fleet like the Enterprise is. And while this young and inexperienced Uhura is, quite naturally, a little different to the somewhat more settled, more mature and self-assured Uhura that we know from the old shows and movies, set at least 10 years later than this is, it still does feel right for her. I mean, how many of you can honestly tell me that sort of in your early 20s, compared to your early 30s, you're exactly the same person as you were between those two time periods? No, people change. So Uhura feeling a bit different is completely natural. And anyone who bitches and whines about, you know, lore and you know, characters not feeling like they should and Spock being slightly more emotional than he was and things like that, this is all part of natural character growth that happens. Unwad your panties about that stuff, guys. Have some perspective, understand where it's all coming from. But this young Uhura is curious and filled with questions and sometimes out of her depth, but never left speechless or frozen by inaction. And if you mess with her, she'll call you out on it. It's very, very Uhura. And on that note, I loved the Ortega and Uhura stuff right at the start. A small moment of inter-character developmental stuff that shows a lot about who both women are as people. And as wry and sardonic as Ortega has been seeming in her small amount of screen time so far, and of course the typical ace pilot self-assuredness awkwardness stuff, she is, in her way, very kindly making an extra effort to make Uhura feel welcomed and accepted as part of the crew, despite her inherent temporary posting as a cadet. And even that little small interaction tells you a ton about Ortega as a person. I'm getting a little Tom Paris vibe from Ortega, actually, and I love that. I wonder who her hapless Harry Kim will wind up being. Then we have a nice relaxed paced scene that teaches us a little more about the kind of captain Pike is. Not in action, not under pressure or duty, but as a leader of people. And I'm really starting to think Pike will be my favourite starship captain in all of Star Trek. While Picard would never host a dinner party like this, Riker might, albeit less formally and perhaps smaller, and the same with Sisko, perhaps even a much smaller scale, just 1 or 2 guests for Sisko. And I can't see Kirk doing this at all in Janeway, although happy to play social butterfly and host in the mess hall at official gatherings and even celebratory parties. This kind of personal openness and intimacy with the crew is a long way from her comfort zone. So Pike is another fresh kind of captain we get to look at. Pike is happily and comfortably hosting 9 people for a dinner in his own private quarters. Some friends, some long-term acquaintances, several new crew members he's just trying to get to know personally, and to allow them to know him more personally, show them the kind of man he is, not as a captain, but as a person, sharing personal stories of embarrassment, for example, so they can sort of bond, so they can work better as a crew, so they can trust him. And used wonderfully subtly to stage a bit of foreshadowing for a later event as well. We also get a little taste of the Anea engineer Hemmer, who between the pre-release trailers and his 2 little moments in this episode, I suspect I'm going to enjoy very, very much. I love a snarky engineer. We also touch on a couple of quiet moments of Pike continuing to struggle with his looming future, something I dug into in great detail in the second video last week if you missed it. I'm quite proud of it. A lot of people seem to have gotten the message I was trying to talk about there, so happy with that. Anyway, with 10 pleasant minutes of wonderfully written character building, we dive into the core plot and conflict proper. Took us a little longer than Trek usually takes to get there, but then again, we're still doing some of the heavier lifting of tone and character establishment, so I'm okay with that. Now this week, the crew discovers a comet they've been checking out is on an orbital trajectory that will slam into a planet, which would be pretty cool to watch, except for the fact there's a whole bunch of people down there who are not going to survive the event, and given their technological development, probably have no idea about the danger they're actually in, and certainly have no way to stop it, much less protect themselves or escape it somehow. Now, at this point, I'm thinking, oh, they're going to lean in to a little light serialization here and dive into another back and forth about what, thanks to their last adventure in episode 1, and Captain Pike's willful defiance of the command, had a name change from General Order 1 to the Prime Directive to try and help drive home its importance to the operating philosophy of Starfleet and non-optional compliance when it comes to interfering with civilizations who haven't yet, all on their own, figured out warp-powered interstellar travel, so we don't mess up their culture too much before they're ready for aliens and stuff. Certainly they have the technology to nudge the comet a bit so it misses the planet, and we've seen comets and other sort of relatively small stellar objects being redirected and shifted about in other Star Trek shows to avoid collisions with planets and whatnot. It's a plot device used to give us a ticking clock. We only have 24 hours to do a thing before unpleasant thing happens. It imparts a sense of urgency and energy to every action, every discussion, and every decision that follows. It's a pretty common writing trope, especially in TV, especially in episodic TV, and Trek uses it a lot. Except it only works properly in an episodic format where you inherently know, as an audience member, you've only the rest of the episode for it all to resolve, so it feels even more urgent. In other shows that are really poorly written, so much so that almost nothing gets resolved until the very last episode of a whole season worth of episodes, this ticking clock looming danger trope falls flat and becomes extremely tiresome and exhausting instead of exciting. Discovery, Picard, calling you out on that. But to my surprise, there was absolutely no discussion on moral duty versus moral obligation when it comes to saving the people on the planet. The words Prime Directive are not even said. I kept waiting for it and it never came. I was sure Spock was all set to spark up on a little speech about how, as distasteful as his crewmates might find it, saving these people is in fact a violation of the Prime Directive. They should do nothing. We've seen a similar plot device used before in other Trek to open up this discussion of morality and where the line is when it comes to interfering with other cultures and their natural cultural evolution and personal agency, even if that means letting them go extinct. Season 7, episode 13 of The Next Generation has Picard himself argue essentially for letting an entire planet of people just die. There's nothing to be done about the disaster itself. In this case, it's an atmospheric disaster. They can't really fix it. There's no specialized photon torpedo to stabilize the atmosphere or something. But he could perhaps save some of the people by taking them off planet and replanting them somewhere. Picard states that the Prime Directive prevents them from saving these people, and it's not for them to decide that one group of people shall survive while the rest of the planet perishes. And indeed, they do just sit there in orbit and watch the whole planet die. And as far as they know, every last native with it. But another character, who has been on planet to study this civilization for a while, went ahead and snatched up a whole village worth of people with the transporters and stashed them in the holodeck. It's a decent, but not one of my favourite episodes, but it does have some wonderful stuff with Worf and some pretty clever plot devices in and around this discussion. Enterprise also had a go at this quandary, 13th episode of Season 1, Dear Doctor, though in this case it was set before Starfleet had General Order 1, but not the Vulcans, so T'Pol became the surrogate voice of the Prime Directive in effect, and to a lesser extent, Dr. Phlox. It was a pretty damn good episode, actually, especially if you liked Dr. Phlox like I do. So I was all set for Strange New Worlds to have a nice, meaty swing at it, expecting Pike and Spock to ping back and forth a bit on the issue of morality and duty versus obligation, much like we saw opened up in the first episode, except this time there's no personal responsibility involved like there was in episode 1 that helped drive Pike's choices and actions. But no, none of that happens. They swing right into action. No discussion, no debate, no moral justifications against duty and standing orders. Just, well, holy crap, man. Let's make a plan so those people down there don't get smooshed by Frosty the Murder Rock. This, by the way, is where we'll inevitably get a touch more spoilery for those worried about that sort of stuff. So this is your cutoff point. This is your warning. So they make a plan, they throw it into action, and I'm completely expecting it to go tits up because it's early in the episode and just that's how things go in shows like this. Maybe the comet is heavier than it should be because it's got some core of exotic material. Hi, SG-1 fans, remember that one? Maybe it shatters apart and now you've got lots of little death slushies that will shotgun the planet instead of smashing it. Maybe one of the engines they're using to nudge it off course slips off and crashes into the planet. Now there's a whole plot about going down there and recovering it before like it explodes or poisons the water supply or something. And of course it does go wrong, but in a way that was so wonderfully unexpected. I literally sat up in bed, bolt upright, and uttered out loud, "What the hell? I didn't see that coming. How exciting. What now? Is it a colony ship? Is it an ark? Maybe a bunch of cryogenically frozen people inside, the last of their kind, and now the quandary is what to do with them. Save them or save the planet? Where's the compromise? How do you figure it all out? Maybe it's a weapon intended to smash the planet, to start terraforming operations for someone planning to settle on it. Whether or not there's people down there already, screw them. We need places to live." There's lots of tropes and plots in sci-fi that we've seen spin out from this kind of setup before, including several that Star Trek itself has done before, more than once. But I'll be damned if they didn't manage to show me something new on this setup, or at least a very new twist on something we've seen before. A religious or near-religious belief system in conflict with, not science, but cultural morality. Now, Gene Roddenberry himself had no interest in folding much religious stuff into Trek, considering that in his future, humanity has moved past the need for superstition and dogma in order to be moral and noble as people. We can do that without all that stuff. We did eventually, and mostly after he'd lost control over Trek, and of course after his death, see quite a lot of plots and conflict around religion and dogmatic belief structures. And some of those episodes were very, very good. And Deep Space Nine, of course, in particular, took it to a whole other level with the Bajoran religious stuff threaded all the way through the show, and even so far as to where faith gets turned into a weapon and radicalization and extremism and terrorism are generated from religious beliefs, and in even hand, how it can also be a thing of peace and order and generosity for some people. Here, though, It's an interesting and fresher feeling take on it. On the one hand, Pike struggles to diplomatically be respectful of the aliens' dogmatic beliefs. They believe the comet is a kind of holy object, not to be touched or interfered with. It's a being in its own right, making its own decisions. It's on a preordained path and mission. It brings life or death, whatever, it's irrelevant. Their only job is to make sure it goes undisturbed by others. A kind of prime directive of their own, if you will. Now that's interesting. Now Pike is on the other side. Someone else's prime directive is stopping him from taking action that his own morality requires of him. And we've seen this kind of reversal of the prime directive in Star Trek before as well. In Voyager, there was an episode where Voyager wanted a piece of technology that was going to help them get home a lot faster. In fact, there was a couple of episodes like this. But, you know, the people who made that technology, well, it's our policy not to give our technology to races less developed than ourselves and whatnot. And oh no, we're only going to use it to get home, and then we'll. Yeah. So it was a whole thing about that being on the other side of a prime directive of a kind. But again, Strange New Worlds episode 2 still took a new twist on this that I wasn't expecting and I didn't quite see coming, and that's part of what made it fun. And now by this point, Pike has not just a planet of strangers to try and save, but also a few members of his own crew who beamed down to the comet to see what the heck was going on with it. They're also now in danger and trapped there and out of communication. Interestingly, it seems Pike's displayed respect for the belief system of these aliens is only stretched so far in that the Enterprise, and in particular its military capability, is outmatched. Otherwise, it seems he was on the verge of making the choice of just disabling the offensive capability of the other ship, snatching up his own crew and making another attempt to redirect the comet no matter what their dogmatic beliefs say. All of this is absolutely prime, core memory Star Trek, and it is beautiful. Now, the solution of how the landing party save themselves is a bit wishy-washy for me and makes one leap of convenience that I had a lot of issue with. The part where Uhura just says, oh, let me try something, and then magically somehow knows exactly the right song to sing to shut off the code for the shields and things like that, when at this point she hasn't even translated the language yet and has only just figured out it's a language at all in the first place. And that's a bit much. That's a step too far. Suspension of disbelief got a little shattered on that one. But I did also love that they managed to tie in Uhura's singing right into the plot. Nichelle Nichols, of course, has a beautiful singing voice, and one she, on a few occasions, got to tie in and show off within Uhura herself on screen. It's nice to see that part of the character carried forward to this version of Uhura too. Honestly, didn't see it coming. And I should have, because before she started humming and singing and stuff, I had already noticed where the gimmick was headed. It's not the first time I've seen the sci-fi gimmick of the mathematics of audio harmonics used as passwords or commands or computer code or whatever. Hello again, Stargate SG-1. Oh, and Stargate Atlantis, actually. And, well, there's a list. I also liked the ultimate resolution to the problem, a wonderfully classic Star Trek solution. Trickery without dishonesty, morality conflict without corrupting either side. It's not good versus evil, one must be destroyed. It's a resolution of conflicting viewpoints, each with its own worth, and leaving open the possibility for that moral discussion to continue. It isn't answered, it's just solved. And the solution towards the conflict plays out classic Trek 2, working as a crew, the captain, the landing party, the bridge crew, working at the same problem, but separately, each with their own thread, each to their own strength, each knowing what their own little piece of the puzzle is, what their duty is in that moment. There's no clumsy exposition, they just do. Comms, tactical, helm, all working in concert under Pike. They know what he'll need. They're ready. And you see them working on it. It's not just a magical MacGuffin solution. It's not just a dumbed down, oh, it's like kite surfing. I kite surf. I know how to, that kind of dipshittery discovery. No. It's a working crew doing working crew things, doing Star Trek things in Star Trek ways. Now, Star Trek has never ever been hard sci-fi. It gets pretty wacky sometimes. The solution technology don't always make perfect sense in scientific or physics sort of frameworks. A lot of the time it's really weird or mysterious or, oh, the wondrous wonders of the universe. Will we ever truly know? Kind of thing going on there. So, using radiated heat from deflector shields on a tiny shuttle to melt a bit of the comet's ice enough to change its course significantly enough, literally minutes before it irreversibly plunges into the gravity well of a planet? Absolute bullshit. Bullshit! I could hear the screams of hundreds of astrophysicists crying out, oh, come on! But it is also a perfectly Star Trek solution, as is the resolution as a whole, the unexpected result and effect on the planet, the clever fulfillment of dogmatic portents and wonderfully sci-fi causality question that is allowed to just hang in the air beautifully. Because Trek is not about answering and explaining crap like this all the time. Trek is about what people do, what they can do, what they should do, and why. And even when they do dive into belief structure stuff, like how Voyager had, on 3 or 4 occasions, I think, had episodes about life after death, it's never just explained away as wacky alien stuff, or here's the pure scientific explanation, or oh, all the religions are right. It's always left just a little bit vague and up for discussion, and it's beautiful. Now, much like episode 1, I don't think this episode will belong in the classic episode folder of many fans, but it is without a doubt 100% Star Trek. I was genuinely excited while watching this episode and after the episode closed. I jumped up, I did a little autistic, I'm emotionally overstimulated hand clappy thing and did a little dancey wiggle and exclaimed to the empty room, I love that we have Star Trek back at last. I'm so happy. Because we do. I mean, sure, we only have 2 episodes, and that's not many data points, but it's certainly feeling like we're on the right trajectory and the right tone for this to remain properly a Star Trek show. And not just a Star Trek show, but a good Star Trek, a well-made, a well-thought-out, a carefully crafted Star Trek show. I'm loving this crew. I want more Hemmer, absolutely. I want more Ortegas, and I really want more Chapel, because while she, like Ortegas, has only had a few moments so far on screen, I'm already neck-deep in her overflowing charisma pool. I love her energy. But my guess is we'll have to wait for Hemmer and Chapel to see more screen time, and I'm betting next episode it's time for number 1 to stretch her legs a bit, because, well, she's the second most important crew member after the captain, and we haven't seen much of her already. And there's a lot about her we still need to know about the kind of number 1 she's going to be, because so far she's just been pretty standard number 1 stuff. There's not been a lot of development for her, so I'm excited to find out more about her, because we only ever got 1 episode of her in the original series before she was retconned out of existence. Kind of. Anyway, thank you for watching. I am Blunty. Hopefully you're enjoying Star Trek as much as I am these days. I will catch you next time. And thank you as always to the patrons up there, my crew. No, not really my crew. I mean, they support me in a way, but the metaphor doesn't work. Thanks to the patrons anyway.